Thanks again, guys, for taking the time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourselves?
I'm Todd Perry. I'm the visual effects supervisor, primary visual effects supervisor on I'm a VIRGO.
Scott Kirvan, Associate Visual Effects Supervisor in VIRGO, and I was my secondary title was Scale Ambassador.
I was trying to push for Scale Czar, but then, things happened and it wasn't looked so fondly upon.
I love that. So I was just curious for you, Todd, if you want to give a bit of an introduction to what I'm a VIRGO is and how you got involved in it.
Well, I'm a VIRGO is Boots Riley's second film. His first film came out in 2018 called Sorry to Bother You, which was a quirky, low-budget, critical hit of that year. It was really critically acclaimed and everybody loved it, but it was small and it was weird and it was satirical and it kind of lived in a world of its own. And I'm a VIRGO isn't a sequel to it, but it feels like it's in the same world. It feels related to. And I think Boots kind of frames it in a way like he's making an album. Like this is a different song of the same album. So in this particular case, Boots, if the audience doesn't know him, he's a Bay Area activist and rap artist and or hip hop artist and filmmaker. He is very present in labor movements and sticking up for the people who don't have a voice and so forth. So his films reflect that, and I'm a VIRGO is no different. And the premise of I'm a VIRGO is that there's a teenage black kid in Oakland who's grown up isolated from the rest of society, from his aunt and uncle, and they are hiding him from society because he is 12 feet tall or 13 feet tall, and they don't want society to fear him, use him, abuse him, kill him, all of these things that they're kind of placing on him, where he just wants to be a kid. And the title I'm a VIRGO comes from the idea that he doesn't view himself as a big giant person who's different from he frames himself that he is a VIRGO, and nobody else in society is looking at him going, I wonder what his sign is. It's this idea that you view yourself in a different way that might be different than how everybody else sees yourself. You view yourself as normal even though you are not necessarily normal in everybody else's eyes. This project then delves into a lot of satire, social commentary about how he is adapting to his particular environment and how that mirrors, other disenfranchised people living in that society, how they are outside of the rules of the quote unquote rules of normal society. And Boots said that in the pitch of it, when I was brought on, it was basically, I want to do all of this in camera and force perspective. I don't want any digital doubles. I don't want any CG or as little CG as possible. And as far as green screens go, he's not totally against that, but he wants to not have it if we can help it. So most of the force perspective stuff is actually in camera without additional compositing and so forth. There's cleanup. There's digital cleanup involved in almost everything. That's that. And then I brought in Scott because I felt like this was too much. So we need somebody else.
Yeah, so Todd called me up and had this possible job. So we got together, met on a boat. Todd was living on a boat at that point. And he described the show, what was going on with it, and we looked at some shots from Darby O'Gill and the Little People and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and talked about kind of what we were looking at. I think I may have even read some little bits from the script, and I pretty much said, well, this is terrifying, but I'd love to do it. And Todd said that's the right answer. Todd and I had worked together. We met back in the 90s in Venice Beach, both in production work. So we've known each other for a very long time and worked together on an awful lot of stuff. So I come at it from a very technical side. I've got an engineering background and all that sort of stuff, and that's what I kind of brought to the table here was the human calculator. As much of a Luddite as I am, be able to operate all this stuff in real time.
Right.
On set.
I was disappointed that you didn't have a slide rule or an atlas.
I did print out all my charts, so I had looker tables for everything.
Have you been working frequently together, or has it been a bit of a reuniting moment to come back together on this project after a few decades apart?
It was definitely a reuniting because Scott stepped away from everything and brewed beer.
Fred Ruff tells me all the stories. I was like, oh wow, he's got the right idea.
But Scott had left for a long time, but we were both in the Pacific Northwest, and so we had gotten together a couple times for sushi and catching up and so forth. And I knew that he was kind of starting to dip his toe back into the production waters, and I thought that I needed his brain and he needed to jump back into the pool. So it was kind of a mutually beneficial opportunity.
Yeah, if you know my background, you know the Brazil renderer. So I kind of started stepping away from production just because running Splutterfish and writing that render became pretty consuming. And that company got acquired, and it was a pretty rough process for me. So I kind of burned out. And at that point, I took a big left turn and opened a brewery up here in the Seattle area. So that's what got me out of the industry for, really away from it for a good decade. And it was actually running across Unreal and RTX, NVIDIA's RTX ray tracing stuff that caught my eye and got me interested. So even while I was still at the brewery, I was starting to mess with this stuff again and getting really excited about it, pretty amped about the what these tools could do. So that's what got me interested into getting into production again. And I just really didn't want to be a software developer anymore, but I wanted to stick to the production side and the supervision work. Mm-hmm. And knowing Todd as well as I have, he was kind of helping me out getting, just reorienting myself and because stepping away from it for that long, I kind of went from where digital was just becoming a thing, like digital cameras and whatnot, to like, so I was still, my background was still working with film and things like that. And so it was just enough time in there that I missed this whole move to much lighter equipment, LED panels being, weighing nothing compared to
not catching on fire every.
Yeah. Even locally, I was working on some small projects, with some local filmmakers and things like that. So I was kind of trying to get back into it and sticking with it. And then when this job came up, I pretty much told everybody at the brewery, well, you guys got to run this by yourselves. And we ended up spending 6 months down in New Orleans working on the thing. And
well, myself included here, pretty much anyone's going to be like, okay, wait, someone went from VFX to starting a brewery, which sounds like a pretty awesome job. I guess what was the experience transitioning into that? I kind of feel like VFX is one of these things. It's like once you're in, as you kind of alluded to, coming back into it again, you can't, you kind of cut a certain way where you can't really escape it. I kind of imagine even if you're not doing it, there's still part of you that's still got a massive investment mentally in VFX. What was it like to leave for a while, and were you still kind of tinkering in the background or following things?
I pretty much stepped away from it. It's sort of like you're in visual effects very deeply, and it ruins movies for you. So it literally took a couple 3 years, and I noticed all of a sudden I was enjoying films again. I was enjoying watching films and just seeing the story, and I wasn't just seeing the techniques and the technology and things like that. So taking that left turn wasn't that hard for me. I've been brewing beer since before I could legally drink. And so I was just a home brewer, and it just took a bit of a break, and decided, well, hey, I'm going to turn this hobby into another hobby into another profession.
Like, I guess VIRGO kind of got off the ground, and how a lot of pretty substantial VFX personalities got involved pretty early into it as well. And I was kind of curious if you could tell the story, because I thought it was pretty fascinating that it kind of came from a different path to most smaller movies.
It's because he was a known personality in the Bay Area already, and he has this confidence to him that he will go and just ask people no matter what their status is. He doesn't have that kind of like perception of any hierarchical system. And he is self-aware enough that he knows what he doesn't know, and he is not afraid to say, I don't know what that is, can you explain it to me? So being in the Bay Area, he went to Bay Area people, and the first person he went to was Phil Tippett. So any of your listeners will probably know who that is, but he is kind of considered a forerunner of stop motion after Ray Harryhausen and Melissa Bryan and Jim Danforth and so forth, who kind of led the way. But he was part of Star Wars. He animated the Walkers and Empire Strikes Back. He moved on to he made the transition to digital as Jurassic Park was happening, Star Troopers, and so he's been around and he's done this stuff. He's done both sides of the fence on this. He's also a bit of a curmudgeon, as I think a lot of the guys from the 70s have now become. Boots went to him and said, I have this idea, and can I talk to you about it? And Phil's like, all right, sure. And Boots goes up to his place and explains to him, I have this big guy, and he's the protagonist. He's going to be in all these shots, and I want to do it practically. I want to do it in forced perspective, like they used to. And Phil's like, you don't want to do that. It's a pain in the ass. You got to build things big. You got to build things small. It's just like a whole thing. But you should really talk to my friend about this. He knows more about it than I do. So my friend's Dennis, and so we'll get him on the line and well, get him in the loop. And so Phil writes to Dennis Muren, who, again, people should know that name. He's one of this, I think he has 8 Oscars, maybe 9, something like that. And so Boots goes to meet with Dennis Muren and Phil Tippett to discuss his giant Black Kid movie. So Dennis explains, you make things so you put him closer to camera and he looks bigger, and you have to watch out for depth of field, and you have to watch for eye lines. And so Boots is basically getting a primer on forced perspective from 2 visual effects luminaries. And Boots said, well, you should just supervise this. And Dennis is like, I don't want to work anymore. So but you should talk to ILM. And Boots' opinion is, well, ILM does all of the digital stuff. I don't want to do the digital CG stuff. And they're like, well, ILM does digital stuff out of necessity. That is because that is what the movies are at. They're doing things that require it to be this way. But they love innovating. They love doing things differently. They love attacking things from different vantage points. So you should talk to them. So Boots gets a interview at ILM, and there's a senior group of supervisors at ILM. Dennis is there, who I guess doesn't show up to meetings anymore. So there's a surprise there. So Boots does his pitch, and Dennis says, yeah, this is the way we used to do it. It's the forced perspective way. And he goes, Boots, you're not going to find anybody who under the age of 65 who's actually done this stuff, who's physically done this. And then John Knoll is in the room, and he's like, I'm under 65 and I've done this, and I think this would be great. This sounds like a great idea. And this meeting was happening right as COVID was starting to take off and be the success that it was. And so in March of 20, I think. And so John Knoll said, we'll take a look at this and we'll get back to you. And they got back to him and said, we'll do storyboards and we'll do an R&D test for you, and we'll put this all together, and we're totally happy to be on board. This is exciting. So everything was good, and the production company kind of dragged its feet long enough for the visual effects industry to figure out that we can all work from home through this pandemic. And then suddenly everything was like, all of the production pipelines were full, and Industrial Light and Magic had no more bandwidth to take on the project, and they were sad about it, but they weren't able to do it. So that's three luminaries: Phil Tippett, Dennis Muren, John Knoll. And then so the next person that got on board is Joel Hynek. So Joel Hynek is our fourth luminary on this, and he comes from the Douglas Trumbull school of thought on this stuff. He worked with Trumbull, I think, on Silent Running, and definitely on Close Encounters and Star Trek. And then Hynek, I think, was a principal at DreamQuest, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So he's been doing this as long as Dennis Muren and all of those guys, and is working under Douglas Trumbull. So now he runs the proof of concept of this, that they want to put together, this test thing of, okay, here, if we build this thing small and build this thing big and put him closer and do all this, then it'll work. So they did forced perspective stuff. They did ones where there were walk and talks, where the camera was moving, where the camera wasn't moving, where they had two cameras side by side at different distances. They did the whole gamut of approaches for how to get this guy into the scene, including a dance club sequence, which kind of blew me away, which we reprised when we actually shot it. So that's all done, and it's moving forward. And then Joel Hynek went away. And then somehow they got my name and asked if I wanted to look at this. And so when I'm getting the story from Boots of this whole origin story, we're now through 4 people who I've grown up like admiring and going, yeah, I want to be like those guys. So after all of that, you're just like finally ended up with me. I'm the end of the road. On this. But fortunately, academically, I knew exactly how all of this stuff was done, because I grew up being just so enamored with and so involved with learning about how all of this stuff was done, that it's like, yes, I understand this academically. I know how all of this stuff works. So, but I also know the digital side of it, and I know how the digital side of it can make this technique work even better than with I guess not as much effort is not the right word, but we can do things that they couldn't as easily have done in the Darby O'Gill days, mm-hmm. when they're doing strictly in camera with some opticals or some matte paintings and things like that. We're able to have things in the frame that we can paint out later that help the actor's performance. And so I kind of knew both sides of that approach, and so how best to use both of the technologies and the techniques.
The interesting thing, I guess that's why I've always been curious about too, is early on I got a call from Amazon from one of the producers tied to the show, just as they're kind of getting things off the ground, and I definitely wasn't the right person for it, and that's why I was very relieved when you came on board, because me, math and lenses and everything else like that just sounds like a giant ball of stress of, if my measurements are wrong, then what happens the next day. So the interesting thing was that we had heavy discussions about a lot of the sequences though, and for instance, I think it was a fair or something, he's like standing on he's standing on a car. I think I'm thinking fair because I'm thinking a smaller car, but he's doing donuts or something on a car. Obviously you guys are very familiar with the sequence, but there's a lot of little things like that where I'm just like, okay, and you kind of want to move away from CG and get most of it in camera. That just sounds lovely. Can I have like a building to blow up? I'm good at that. But that's why I thought it was pretty interesting, like getting the right people for the right job. And like, I'd love to hear both your takes. Like, coming into this, was there any nervousness about certain sequences or about the show in general, just knowing that, you know, you really got to be precise with everything, and due diligence obviously plays off here.
A lot of nervousness, yeah. You know, we got a little bit of prep time. I think I was there just 2 weeks prior to principal photography, and so we did get to work together and do meet together and think a lot about what was going on. Prior to that, a lot of research. Todd didn't mention, but Todd had a meeting with the people who were working on Lord of the Rings at the same time, and they're the guys who recommended pretty strongly that you have somebody who is really responsible for the scale elements, right? That's the scale ambassador idea, and that allows Todd to be visual effects supervisor, and you've got somebody else who can really keep an eye on and have their head in that space. So having played a little bit, you know, just with my camera and whatnot to do a little bit of force perspective work, and then walking on set and going, okay, we don't get to plan these ahead. We're gonna walk onto location, and the director and the DP are gonna decide where the camera goes, and then we have to adapt to that, right? And it wasn't like the first day was the nightclub scene or some nightmare like that, right? And it was just like, we didn't go into it like gradually or easily, or let's make sure this works first. It was just like, no, we're going to take one of the most difficult shots in the entire show, and we're going to start with that one. Yeah. So it was a lot of like quick calculations, and then, oh no, that's wrong, we got to change this. And just the stress of slowing down production on that day was what almost killed me. Because, you know, we try to stay out of the way as much as possible, you know, and let them do their work and just support the creative activity, not get in the way of it. So it was that sort of stuff, and it was a lot of catching things where, you know, oh, he's this big, he has to walk half as fast as everybody else. So it's kind of like, I just felt like that nervousness is like sticking my nose in all the time and going, oh, but remember, oh, you gotta, you know, telling your DP what the f-stop has to be is not a spot you want to be. But you got to do it because it's the only way that the depth of field is going to make any sense with where the characters are. Otherwise, it's going to look like a con, you know. Like we call it story scale, because in story scale, the character is 13 feet tall. Our actor Jarrell, he was a half scale version of the real character. So we thought of, you kind of got to think of him as a miniature. And so now you're shooting a miniature and you're shooting a live action plate in story scale at the same time. And you've got to realize that your camera that you're shooting the miniature with has to actually be a half scale camera too. So that affects your f-stops and all this sort of stuff, you know.
So your aperture is half the size as the full scale camera, which Scott and I spent a day figuring, because we both thought we were going to have to use some kind of calculus to figure this out. Mine was a thought experiment. Like if you're this far away from the wall in miniature and it has to be in focus, and then when you're in full scale that wall would be in focus, then okay, well, what f-stop do you need to have to get both of those in focus? And Scott was doing the math and doing angles and stuff like that, and almost at the same time we were both like, it's half the amount. And we're like, it can't be that simple.
Todd went to the charts and started looking at lens charts, and I rederive lens equations. And I started doing all the work, and all of a sudden everything fell out. It was just a 2-to-1 ratio, and it's like, you're kidding. That's all it is.
So we had to explain that to the DP because it affected how things were shot, even if it wasn't a forced perspective shot. If you were shooting Cootie in a single shot, you had to imagine that you're shooting with a camera that's half the size of the normal camera, because our actor is supposed to be twice the size of what he normally is. So if you are on a single of him, that aperture, if the director wanted to shoot on a 2.8, then the aperture would be a 5.6. So even though it's not a forced perspective shot, it still has to be considered as a miniature shot. And so every time we were in one of those shots where it's like, well, this isn't visual effects, I would still go over to the DIT and just kind of peek over and look at where our apertures were set on the cameras to make sure that this was correct. And this revelation came a little bit, a couple weeks into the shoot. So there's a couple earlier shots where I'm like, oh my god, that f-stop is wrong.
Yeah.
he looks too small, but nobody else is dialing into that.
Yeah, we even had to step in with some of the language of film aspects of it, because you have a conversation in close-up between the giant and his love interest, for example, and so the camera goes over the shoulder each direction. And if you think about how you'd shoot that in real life, you'd use one camera, one lens, shoot this way, same camera, same lens, shoot this way. Well, the director and the DP want to get in really close on the actress, right? Because she's good to look at, right? And when the camera turns around and you got to go, well, if you're that close on her, you really got to be just looking at his nose now,
right?
Because you want to get his head in frame, and then when you turn around, you want her head smaller in frame. Yeah. It's still, because that still tells that story. And when you watch the show, you'll see it. And there's times that they kind of break that rule. And to me, it pops. To me, it like, ooh, the scale's blown. I'm not getting the scale anymore, you know. But I got really sensitive to seeing scale now.
Right.
I bet.
But our language, our communication with the camera department was critical. The camera operator and the camera crew were really turning to us for, okay, what do we shoot? How do we shoot this? Because every forced perspective shot had to be on a nodal head, so that we could adjust the camera without breaking the parallax. So every time it's like, all right, this is a forced perspective shot. Is it on a nodal head? Of course it's on a nodal head, because it's a perspective shot. So let's just get it into our minds that this is how our forced perspective shots are going to be set up. And then the focus puller, a guy named Zach, is really good at calculating out, okay, are we within spec on this lens? Can we get that depth of field from this distance to this distance? And he comes to us and, hey, we're gonna not be able to get this. And then we start to figure out, okay, well, can we set the focus? What happens when we set the focus right in between us? Are we both in focus enough, or is that not enough? And at that point, do you add more light and you stop it down a little bit, or do you change the lens, or you start figuring out the way around getting that proper depth of field? But without his information, we can't have that conversation.
You're not just thinking about this take, you're thinking about the way it connects on the other end. So if you've got to bring your depth of field closer, then you're gonna have to do it on both ends. Like, just everything's gonna have to play out. Like, you obviously have to think about what you're filming in this very minute, but then how that will plug into the other takes that you're doing. So it's going to be a massive, I'm trying to think of a word other than head fuck, but a massive head fuck to
you end up being the go-to people for all departments in this situation. So art department is coming to you, camera department's coming to you, everyone is coming to you for the answers for stuff. Like if you're shooting in a big set and a little set at the same time, and our department is spending all their time like dressing the set in an area that you're going to be actually using the other set to in the shot. It's like, stop spending your time over there. No, we're not seeing that one. Go to the other one.
How soon into it did you guys feel comfortable? Like, okay, cool. Like, we've figured this out. This is going to work. Hopefully.
Well, we knew it would work, but I don't think there was any time where we were like, yeah, we nailed it. Or I know all of the answers, because every shot is unique, and every shot is, we need to like, okay, set up the camera. Does that feel right? Is he right? Okay, mathematically it's correct. Does he feel correct when we look at him through the camera? Do we need to adjust things? Do we need to change the eye lines? Are they broken? Why is it looking in the wrong place? Are we getting shadows somewhere that we're not? Are we seeing? There's one shot that I had to digitally remove the reflection. There's a mirror like way in the back, and we could see the platform and the setup of the miniature setup in the mirror. And so it's like, okay, well, I guess it's that. We're revealing our magic trick, basically. In Oakland, I had to head back down to LA, so Scott took over for that weekend in Oakland, which was a pretty. They were driving around Oakland on a process truck with our Jarrell, the actor, in a miniature car up on a platform on a process truck driving around real Oakland. And it's like, well, we never planned for that. How are we going to do that one? That's not in our toolbox of forced perspective shots. That is a totally unique setup. So every week, every day is a new problem to solve. It may rhyme with other problems that we've solved, but there are unique qualities to every single setup. And I think it was 60. I think our count was 60 unique setups for the whole thing. And every time you learn a little bit more, and then you're ready for the next shot. So like when we were in the nightclub, the DP was like fogging up the set, and I was going, "What are you doing? We can't have fog." No, it's just a hint of
Atmosphere.
Atmosphere, and I'm like, that's not gonna work. Okay, we'll shoot it once. Okay, yeah, this isn't working. Open all the doors, clear all of this stuff, and after that, anytime I saw a fog machine anywhere near the set, I would just get apoplectic. It would just be like, what is this doing here? I don't want this here nearby at all. Just take it away. So nobody is like tempted to turn that on, because we can't have any atmosphere in the show. At least on perspective shots, it breaks the illusion, because you're adding that. And not only are you dealing with depth of field and all of that kind of stuff as a cue for perspective, but atmospheric perspective,
light scattering, and
is still critical to.
Yeah, it's a depth cue.
Yeah, I guess like Scott, for you, I was curious as well. Like you'd mentioned Lord of the Rings, and obviously that was another forced perspective show. I know that you guys had a bit of crossover in terms of discussing and doing things like that. I was wondering if either of you want to elaborate on that?
Well, Lord of the Rings had a lot more money.
They got the plan and lock sets down.
And they had a lot more preparation, and they had things like motion control cameras and things like that, which we didn't, as a double-edged sword, we didn't have the luxury of using that, and we didn't have the burden of it either, because setting up those shots requires a whole another level of people and operators and so forth. And it's like, okay, we've done this move, now when we scale it down, what does that do, and how does that work? So there was a motion control test, and it just took them the entire day to do, and it wasn't completely satisfactory. And so Boots just said, we're not doing any motion control stuff, it just slows us down too much. So that was one crossover thing that we learned from the Lord of the Rings crew. Like, it was a great insight to see how they did that, but it was not information that we necessarily utilized in any practical sense.
Got it.
Scott gave them technology.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
he-
we did.
Good.
I mean, one of the big takeaways from that meeting with them was to stick to your guns, to on the scale stuff. To be the bad guy if you have to, but to really just knowing in advance that we were going to get kind of blown off and that everybody was going to have an opinion and everybody's going to try to get their hands in there. They said, just stick to your guns. You're the expert on this. You have to assert yourself and just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, and eventually it'll all work. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
First day on set was just like everybody was moving the props around and doing all this
Yeah.
stuff. And it's
Everybody
like,
was a force perspective
yeah.
guru.
Yeah.
They knew exactly what was wrong.
I've seen Lord of the Rings, the movie. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
In the behind the scenes.
But it was, they were, everybody was really great and super supportive. The grip team in particular was amazing. They became like a tool for us to use, and they were so good about being adaptive because we'd give them an idea. Okay, this is the setup we're going to be doing next, so have these pieces of equipment ready to go, and then the director would come in and they'd turn the camera around the other direction and we're going to shoot this way instead. It's like, okay, all that stuff, that's all. We don't need any of that. We need all these things instead. And it was just like early on, the force perspective setup added probably 15-20 minutes to each turnaround in a way, right? But within a matter of just a few days, we knocked that down to like 5 minutes.
Wow.
Of actual delay that we were throwing in on most cases. There was still some that were just really complex, and you still just had to go, well, we just have to set this up, and yeah, we got to measure everything, and we got to figure out how to do this, because even the stuff we're doing, even though it's just like setting the actor up on a platform closer to the camera so that his head is in the right position in frame and all that sort of stuff, if he's moving at all and he's not on a flat ground, well, now you've got to basically miniaturize and move the ground closer to the camera. So it ends up being, you've got to almost like just very quickly survey the site and build a miniature platform that's representing the same tilt of the ground. And if there's a step, we have to miniaturize that step so that he actually steps up and you see his head go up as he walks, you know?
So we had to, what we did was we got a survey laser so that Scott could just basically set that up on a tripod and it would spin the laser, and that would give us our zero plane. Mm-hmm. Because in a location we have no control over the ground, so the ground's not level. So, but we need somewhere to measure from. So Scott would set up the laser, and that would give us our zero. And so we would now have a negative and a positive measurement that would go from 0 to the camera lens and then 0 to the ground. And that would give us our height. And so as Scott was saying, the platforms would then have to miniaturize around those levels.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're literally shooting on a hill.
Yeah.
And so we would have no gauge for where to measure from to miniaturize the stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, you guys would have contemplated this and I guess decided against it. Perhaps it was just more of a time limitation, but was there ever any discussions about Unreal or anything that at least just being able to block it out, whether your LiDAR or something, and throw it on a laptop or whatever, but being able to kind of have something help you
we did that,
cheat the math a little bit?
I wrote some, basically like a game in Unreal, so you could actually just drop in characters. We were LiDARing sets and dropping those into Unreal, and then setting up our story scale characters, like where they were supposed to be working and talking, and then Unreal would basically, you could pop outside the cinema camera and look at the scene from a witness camera, and so now you could see where the actual actor had to be with the height. It would dump out the platform height and all that sort of stuff. We used it a little bit. We did even for some of the like tech scouts and whatnot, we did some AR stuff using an iPad and scaled up people, so we could go, well, here's how big our character is in this space. So, he's gonna have to really bend over because this is an 8-foot ceiling, and so he's gonna be pretty packed in this particular location and things like that.
Yeah.
We were using Unreal just on set as things were unfolding and finding out, okay, this is what the shot's going to be, and we'd have to drop it into Unreal real quick to take a look at, okay, well, where can we put the camera then? Because if we're shooting this here, that means we got to duplicate this now in the miniaturized set. So
Right.
we've got to make sure that we don't paint ourselves into a corner and we can't get the camera in the right position. So basically going, okay, we've got to imagine this camera's huge because it's got to fit in our small location. So you can't back the camera up all the way to the wall. You got to move it out 18 inches from the wall in order for us to be able to duplicate the second half of this particular piece.
We did have a 3-person team during the prep time to do previs / techviz / scaleviz. Is that a thing?
It is
But I had to explain to them, okay, you're taking these storyboards and you're making the shot like you would in a previous situation, but we have this double-sized character, so I need you to have a double-sized character, and I need you to have the same character that's half the size, because I need you to place him in the same position, in the same pose that matches the position of his full-scale character, and then I need you to show me where that platform is and so forth. So we went through all of the boards that required any kind of forced perspective stuff, and we did that. We scale visited out to not to inform the rest of the crew mainly, but to inform us internally of what this setup is going to look like. I did some of the more complex stuff. I did send that out, so like if stunts were involved or things like that, I would lay it out in Maya or Unreal, and then go to a witness camera and say, this is how this setup is going to look. Kind of like there's a shot where Cootie runs through a crowd and then jumps up onto a cop car and leaps off, which Scott was there on boots on ground for supervising, but we had to discuss it with our stunt supervisor, Chelsea. She needed to see the platform setup that we needed to build to make sure that everything was safe, and so she understood what this stunt was going to consist of. So it was a lot of those things were fairly critical to talk to some of the other departments about when it got to be that complex. But I got into a habit or a method of printing out the day's stuff. So normally you get your call sheet, right, when you go to when you're going to set. Well, we use the one-liners, which is for anyone in the audience who don't know, the one-liner basically tells you what scenes you're shooting on what days of the shoot. And we would kind of look ahead and say, okay, here's a forced perspective shot in here that we're going to plan for. And I would basically write up a document that showed, here's the shots that we're going to be shooting. Here's what the shot looks like. Here's what it looks like from a third-person vantage point. And here's what we need. And I had a bunch of check marks. So it was just like puppets, platforms, green screen, stunts, whatever we needed for that shot, I would tick off. I would say camera is approximately a 35 millimeter lens. The camera is approximately at 42 inches high, and which is always variable, but that kind of seemed to be about the realm. The 38 to 42 inches was about the realm that we were always kind of falling in. And then I would write down the methodology for setting up the shot, because there was an order of operations that had to happen for when we did it. It was like, we need to find out where the camera is first. Then we do the measurements. Then we bring in the platform. Then we bring in the stand-in. We measure the eye lines. And just step by step, in order of operations of what we need to do to accomplish this shot, so that I don't know how much the crew looked at it. I know the puppet guys looked at it. I know the camera operator looked at it, and I'm pretty sure that the AD looked at it. But it was to inform everyone of what is going to go into this shot, so that I'm not getting questions of like, well, do we have this shot set up yet? Well, no, we're at like stage 1. We need to choose the camera first. Where's the camera? Talk to the director, the DP, and then come to me. It was a lot of information management and information distribution that I feel went far beyond what a normal shoot would be, just because it's such a unique way of shooting, and everybody needed to kind of be aware of the process. I've gotten messages from that crew saying, is VIRGO 2 going to happen? Are they coming back to New Orleans? And I'm like, I suspect, because, you know, we don't want to train a whole new crew on how all of this stuff works. You guys now have institutional knowledge about this particular way of shooting stuff, and that has some value to it.
We had to develop a language, you know, define terms, so when people were communicating, they were all on the same page, you know, and things like that. So there was a lot of just getting everybody into that headspace, which is it literally is a headspace you end up living in to do this stuff, you know.
I went up to one of my engineers the other day, and I had to chat to him, and he was just kind of throwing around a lot of words not making much sense, and I was like, don't worry, I'm the same way. Like, if I've been coding for at least 2 or 3 hours, like, I can't talk to human beings for all the time. It's like, so yeah, I'm sure you guys, well, I know both of you can relate. It's yeah, you get your head so invested in something, it's kind of, you gotta take a moment to snap back out of it and evaluate what's going on outside.
Yeah.
Are there any particular tools that you rely on every day that you carry on set with you, or even apps these days as well, that you just find to be, you know, detrimental? Sun Scout, things like that have always been my go-tos.
Well, we used Polycam to do our scanning and so forth, and that also was the tool that we used for the AR visioning the size. I did a scan of Scott, so he was our character, and so we would basically bring up the camera at the location that we were at and just drop Scott in at twice the size and say, okay, this is about how tall our character is going to be. So is there anything that we have to worry about, you know, top and bottom? So that was one tool. Measuring tape was a good tool.
Yeah.
Scott did up all kinds of graphs and little spreadsheets for scale calculation type of stuff. Scott's iPad was kind of amazing. It was just this Swiss Army knife of data that is all Velcroed together. It's kind of, I would expect it to be seen on like a Navy SEAL type of info reconnaissance guy. He just had this, you know, this pack that just has all of this stuff stuck to it.
Combat iPad.
Right, exactly.
That's all Velcro. And I'd have my laser disto attached to this. I'd have my phone attached to it. All kinds of stuff. Everything
is attached to that one. We had our laptops there, but there wasn't any kind of software or anything that we were turning to do like live calculations of stuff. It was more like, okay, here are the actual math calculations. Does this look right in the camera? Mm-hmm. I did make a pair of glasses, which I wish I would have used more often, but I attached a laser to it, And so the actor could put on the glasses, and the laser would point to where his eye line was.
That's great.
And so it worked in one particular one where we had a small character walking around the big character, and the big character had to track her. And so we took her scale puppet and we walked it around on his platform, because his platform is basically his little scale island, his miniature world. And so we basically said, okay, she's here, so look at her face. And he would line up the laser on her face, and then we would move the puppet and we'd see where it was on the floor, and we'd put a mark on the floor, and then just block out where she was walking, so he could follow where her head was going to be. Because where he's looking at her eyes, his eye line is further back than where she's actually standing. So it's not like we could just place the markers where her feet were. You had to actually like calculate further out to where it was going to be. Yeah, you're on Phil Tippett's side. It's just a big pain in the ass. You just
Q-Take ended up being really invaluable on set, and on the planning side, we used VSlate, which I was very, very impressed with. The level of organization, just the ability to pull up data if we needed information about a previous shot or something. That was something we were doing an awful lot. What camera did we use? How was this set up? And I've not seen that level of organization and ease of access of that information before, so that was really great. Like we mentioned, used Unreal calculator.
Yeah, I mean, again, this has been so great to get to nerd out about a lot of this stuff, and I definitely do have to check out I'm a Virgo.
Only a half an hour an episode. You could just...
I know. That's what I was saying to someone the other day at work, is like, I'm so envious of them. They get to put headphones on. There's not one part of any of my jobs where I get to listen to music or watch a movie or anything. It's always stuff involved where I gotta be either writing. I mean, again, you guys are in the same boat. It's just either writing, planning, or meetings. It's never something I can just zone out and like get to enjoy some TV or something. So, or I could just actually go home at night like a normal, non-crazy person and get to relax one of these days. Thanks so much. This has been really awesome to get to chat with both of you and hear all about I'm a Virgo. So appreciate both of you.
Happy to talk about it. I get totally nerdy about this stuff. I could talk about it for hours.
Awesome.
Sometimes do.